Tonight, we're showing you new evidence just discovered.
But as CBS 13's Tony Lopez tells us, old questions still linger. What's taken so long to close the book on this horrific crime?
Imagine this. You're miles away from the nearest city, deep in a quiet town or forest. The air is still, the road's empty, and the silence feels heavier than usual. Then, without warning, you hear footsteps outside, the crunch of gravel, the creak of your front porch. You peek through the window. You see strangers in masks staring back. That's the terrifying premise of The Strangers. But what if I told you real life is even worse? Welcome to Lost Tapes 404. Tonight, we dive into 3 chilling true stories where isolation, strangers, and the unthinkable collided. From a cabin slaughter that's remained unsolved for decades, to a brutal mountain invasion that destroyed a family, to a masked phantom who turned lovers' lanes into death traps. These are the real-life horror stories that prove sometimes the scariest monsters aren't supernatural. They're human. Grab your flashlight, lock your doors, and let's step into the shadows. Our first story takes us to the tiny, secluded town of Keddie, tucked away in the thick forests of Northern California. It was the kind of place where neighbors waved at one another, where children roamed freely, and where life seemed peaceful. But in April of 1981, that illusion was shattered forever. Cabin number 28, a modest wooden home at the Keddie Resort, became the scene of one of the most horrifying unsolved mysteries in American crime history. Inside lived Sue Sharp, a recently divorced mother of 5 who had moved there only months before in search of a fresh start. That night, Sue was home with her teenage daughter Tina, 2 of her younger children, and a couple of friends. To anyone passing by, it looked like a quiet evening in a sleepy mountain town. But what happened after midnight would haunt the community for decades. The next morning, neighbors entered the cabin and stumbled onto a nightmare. Sue, her 15-year-old son John, and John's 17-year-old friend Dana Wingett were found brutally slain. The details chilled investigators. They had been bound with medical tape, stabbed repeatedly, and bludgeoned with a hammer. Blood splattered across the walls and furniture, evidence of a frenzied, prolonged struggle. Even more disturbing, 3 younger children were found alive, unharmed, asleep in another room. Somehow, they had survived the night untouched, while their family and friend were butchered just steps away. But the horror didn't end there. Sue's youngest daughter, 12-year-old Tina, was missing. For 3 long years, her fate remained a mystery. Then, in 1984, her skeletal remains were discovered in a remote part of the county. The location, far from the cabin, raised even more questions. Police suspected multiple attackers. A hammer, knives, even a rifle had been used. But despite questioning suspects, including some chillingly close to the family, the case went cold. To this day, no one has been officially convicted. Locals began to whisper that cabin number 28 was cursed. Visitors reported strange noises, phantom footsteps on the porch, shadows gliding past windows, and lights flickering inside, though the electricity was cut years earlier. Others swore they could feel a heavy, suffocating presence the moment they stepped inside. The cabin was finally demolished in 2004, but the echoes of that night remain. Keddie learned that sometimes evil doesn't knock. It slips in quietly and leaves behind a silence more terrifying than screams. If the Keddie murders were about brutality without reason, our next story is about invasion, where a family's mountain retreat turned into their final nightmare. High in the snowy mountains of Oakley, Utah, the Tiede family owned a quiet cabin. To them, it was the perfect winter retreat. Surrounded by tall pines, crisp air, and silence, broken only by the crunch of snow under boots. It was supposed to be a place of peace and family bonding, a safe haven far from the chaos of the outside world. But in February of 1990, that sanctuary became a death trap. On a bitterly cold night, 2 armed men crept toward the cabin. They weren't there to rob and run. They came for blood. Once inside, the home became a stage for violence so senseless it left even hardened investigators shaken. The intruders turned on the family without hesitation. They killed the mother and her young daughter in cold blood, striking with a brutality that defied explanation. Other members of the family were beaten, one seriously wounded, while others were taken hostage. The surviving relatives recalled how quickly the cabin shifted from laughter and warmth to screams and chaos. But the killers weren't finished. After the murders, they set the cabin ablaze, hoping the fire would cover their tracks. Flames devoured the wooden walls, sending sparks and smoke into the snowy night sky. The glow could be seen through the trees for miles, a beacon of horror in the frozen wilderness. Survivors later described the hellish scene. The crackle of fire mingling with panicked cries, the suffocating smoke clawing at their lungs, the bitter cold slicing at their skin as they stumbled barefoot into the snow to escape. Imagine being trapped in the mountains, the nearest help miles away, while faceless killers destroyed everything you held dear. The attackers fled into the night, but their cruelty left scars that still haunt Oakley. Even after arrests were made, the story of the Tiede Cabin lingered. Locals whispered of echoes in the forest, distant screams carried on the wind, or the smell of smoke drifting through the trees on clear nights. Hikers claimed to feel a strange heaviness in the air near the ruins, as if the land itself remembered the terror. What was meant to be a family refuge became a graveyard of innocence. The Tiede Cabin Murders proved a chilling truth. Even the safest places can become prisons when evil decides to force its way in. The first story was about brutality without answers. The second about invasion and fire. But our last takes us into small-town America, where an unknown figure stalked from the shadows and became legend. Our final story takes us back to 1946 in the quiet border town of Texarkana, straddling Texas and Arkansas. Life there was simple. Neighbors chatted on porches, kids played in the streets, and couples drove out to Lover's Lane to enjoy the warm southern nights. But in the spring of that year, all that innocence was destroyed. An unidentified assailant began targeting couples in secluded spots, stalking them in the dark. Locals would soon call him the Phantom Killer, a faceless figure whose motives were as unclear as his identity. Over the course of just 10 weeks, he attacked 8 people and killed 5. His victims were young couples, doing nothing more than parking to talk or share a kiss under the stars. Instead, they found themselves staring into the barrel of a gun wielded by a man wearing a white cloth mask with ragged eye holes cut out. That crude disguise, simple yet grotesque, would burn itself into the town's collective memory. The attacks were brutal. Some victims were shot multiple times. Others were beaten savagely and left for dead. One young woman managed to escape after being assaulted, running barefoot for nearly a mile until she reached help. Her description of the Phantom, a tall figure in the mask, silent and merciless, only deepened the terror spreading through Texarkana. The randomness of the crimes terrified the entire community. There was no pattern, no clear motive, no sense of safety. Couples stopped going out at night. Parents locked their children indoors. People began buying weapons in droves. And for weeks, the streets of Texarkana were deserted after sunset. The town that once bustled with life became a ghost town, suffocated by fear. Despite massive police manhunts, roadblocks, and the involvement of the Texas Rangers, the Phantom Killer was never caught. He seemed to vanish into the night as suddenly as he appeared. His identity remains one of America's most enduring mysteries. But the fear never really left. For decades, locals whispered about strange figures seen near the Lover's Lanes, about the feeling of eyes watching from the woods. Some claimed that if you drove out late at night, you could still see the outline of a man in a white mask standing by the roadside, waiting. The case would later inspire the cult horror film The Town That Dreaded Sundown, but no movie can capture the true dread of Texarkana in 1946, where the line between small-town peace and nightmare was crossed by a faceless stranger who was never brought to justice. 3 stories. A family slaughtered in their cabin with no answers. Another family destroyed by intruders who turned their mountain home into a pyre. And a small town stalked by a masked phantom who vanished into legend. What ties them together? Isolation, vulnerability, the terrifying truth that in the darkest hours, evil doesn't need a reason, it just needs opportunity. So the next time you're driving down a lonely road or spending the night in a quiet cabin, remember this: the Strangers movie might be fiction, but the real world has already written scripts far scarier. We drop new terrifying stories every Friday at 5 p.m. So if you haven't already, hit subscribe and join us in the dark. Stay curious, stay safe, and never forget, sometimes the footsteps outside your door aren't in your imagination.